grateful.
I ask the Lord that He may give us the grace to gain the awareness of this problem of destruction that we ourselves are responsible for.
That was Pope Francis on Tuesday, praying in front of a group of more than 60 mayors from around the world who had come to the Vatican to talk about climate change. Well, his prayers may have been answered. A controversial paper released this week claims to bring new understanding to just how much damage we've done and says it may be worse than previously believed, predicting much faster polar melting and thus potentially catastrophic sea level rises, much faster than we ever believed possible, as much as 10 feet within just 50 years. The paper's lead author is a name you may know. The Washington Post calls him the world's most famous climate scientist. James Hansen is the former director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies. He is the man who many credit with bringing global warming to the world's attention in the 1980s through some striking congressional testimony. He's now an adjunct professor at Columbia University's Earth Institute. You say that there will be a 10-feet rise in 50 years. What does that mean? It feels like a long way off, its numbers. What would that mean?
Not only would it be 10 feet, but it would imply that in the next decades after that, it would be even more. Because where this water is coming from is the West Antarctic ice sheet, and then there's another part of the East Antarctic ice sheet, which also has several meters of sea level rise in its ice. So what that would mean is coastal cities would become dysfunctional. Parts of the city would still be above water, but it wouldn't make sense to try to rebuild them partially because they know the water's going to keep rising. So we can't let it go unstable. We would lose all the coastal cities in the world, and that's enormous cost, which would affect everybody, whether they're living on the coast or not.
And most of the world lives around coastlines.
That's right.
But your hypothesis, you look back, you look at a period that's really 120,000 years ago, and some of your critics are saying, well, who knows if that's applicable now? Why did you choose that?
Well, we did several things. That was one of the things we did, is to look at the last time it was warmer than today. And it was less than 1 degree Celsius warmer than today, and sea level reached heights of 6 to 8 meters higher than today. So if we allow the temperature to go 2 degrees higher, we're guaranteeing that that sea level rise will occur. We just aren't sure how fast it will occur. And what our study shows, it's a lot faster than the glaciologists had imagined.
You saw the Washington Post ask some other scientists, there have been people on Twitter, like Ruth Morat, who have responded, and some of them are skeptical. Do you understand the skepticism?
Oh, sure. That's the nature of science. That's the lifeblood of science. You always are skeptical of any new conclusion. And so that's not surprising at all. But compare it to the 1980s when I testified to Congress. There was an overwhelming skepticism and criticism, and then over a few years the story changed. Here, there were a lot of people becoming very suspicious that the IPCC was underestimating the sea level problem.
So here's the million-dollar question, trillion-dollar question. What do we do about it?
What the science is telling us is that we have an emergency. If we want our children and grandchildren to inherit a planet which is not running out of their control, we're going to have to reduce emissions as fast as practical. As long as fossil fuels are the cheapest energy, people are going to keep burning them and going to find them, to dig them up wherever they can find them. But we have to make them pay their cost to society. So what we need to do is add a gradually rising fee to the fossil fuels, which you would collect from the fossil fuel companies at the source, the domestic mine or the port of entry. And that money should be distributed to the public, all legal residents of the country. That way the person who does better than average in limiting his carbon footprint will make money. And it'll be a big incentive for them to pay attention to their carbon footprint. It will be a big incentive for entrepreneurs to develop no carbon and low carbon energy sources and products. And the economic studies that have been done show that this actually stimulates the economy. So it doesn't cost anything. It's just common sense that in order to move to a future with clean energies, we have to make the fossil fuels pay their cost to society, but do it in a way which is not a tax. You know, the conservatives will never accept it if it's a tax in which the government takes the money and then uses it to make the government bigger. We've got to make it revenue neutral. And the best way to do that is to give the money back to the public.
James Hansen, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Okay, let's bring on Bill. He's an environmentalist and president and co-founder of 350.org.
And my guest, Bill McKibben,
Our nation's leading environmentalist.
We started this thing called 350.org. We're going out and building the kind of political movement that will change things. We just announced this roadshow out across the country to really try and take it at the fossil fuel industry. People are just lining up to try and get involved in this fight. The moment has come that we have to make real stands. We're reaching limits. The biggest limit that we're running into may be that we're running out of atmosphere into which to put the waste products of our society, particularly the carbon dioxide that's the ubiquitous byproduct of burning fossil fuel. You burn coal or oil or gas, you get CO2, and the atmosphere is now filling up with it. We know what the solutions for dealing with this trouble are. Many of the technologies we need to get off fossil fuel and onto something else. The thing that's preventing us from doing it is the enormous political power wielded by those who have made and are making vast windfall profits off of fossil fuel.
Well, there have been a lot of efforts by scientists to try to estimate whether we are living sustainably in the sense of whether we're consuming planetary resources at a rate that can be continued. The threat that this combination of climate change, water shortages, food shortages, and rising energy prices is enormously troubling to anybody who's aware of the data and the way these issues could play out.
You can't keep increasing your economy infinitely on a finite planet. One of the things that humanity is facing is the need to dramatically reduce its carbon footprint over the next 40 years. And we're talking in the wealthy countries about 80 to 90% reductions.
We're no longer at the point of trying to stop global warming too late for that.
This is the biggest emergency the human family has faced since it came out of the caves. There is nothing bigger.
All these issues matter, immigration and healthcare and education, but this one is really about the physical change of the planet.
We all have been saying we need to save the planet. But as I think about it, the planet's going to be around for some time to come. What's at stake now is civilization itself.
Our most important climatologist, Jim Hansen, had his team at NASA do a study to figure out how much carbon in the atmosphere was too much. The paper they published, maybe the most important scientific paper of the millennia to date, said we now know enough to know how much is too much. Any value for carbon in the atmosphere greater than 350 parts per million is not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. That's pretty strong language for scientists to use. Stronger still if you know that outside today, the atmosphere is 395 parts per million CO2 and rising about 2 parts per million per year. Everything frozen on Earth is melting. The great ice sheet of the Arctic is reduced by more than half. The oceans are about 30% more acidic than they were 30 years ago because because the chemistry of seawater changes as it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. And because warm air holds more water vapor than cold, the atmosphere is about 5% wetter than it was 40 years ago. That's astonishingly large change. If the world officially believes anything about climate change, it's that 2 degrees is too much. Second number, scientists have calculated how much carbon we could pour into the atmosphere and have a reasonable chance of staying below 2 degrees. They say about 565 more gigatons. A gigaton is 1 billion tons. That's not a perfect chance. That's worse odds than Russian roulette, you know. It sounds like it should be a lot. It is a lot. 565 billion tons of CO2. The problem is we pour 30 billion tons a year in now, and it goes up 3% a year. Do the math, and it's about 15 years before we go past that threshold. So that's sobering news. But the scary number is the third number. The third number was the important one and the new one. And it came from a team of financial analysts in the United Kingdom. And what they did was sit down with all the annual reports and SEC filings and things and figure out how much carbon the world's fossil fuel industry, how much they had already in their reserves. And that number turned out to be 2,795 gigatons worth of carbon. 5 times as much as the most conservative governments on Earth think would be safe to pour into the atmosphere. It's not even close. I mean, it's 5 times more. And once you know that number, then you understand the essence of this problem.
What the fossil fuel industry is doing is locking us into a future that we can't survive, that humanity cannot survive. And we know this because just at the end of 2012, we heard this from 3 different conservative sources simultaneously. The World Bank, the International Energy Agency, PricewaterhouseCoopers, hardly a hippie outfit, all told us that if we do nothing but more of the same, if we dig up those reserves, we are headed towards 4 to 6 degrees warming Celsius.
Once you know what's evil, now if you're ignorant, you get a pass. But once you know what's evil, you have a moral responsibility to withdraw your energy from it.